An 8-year-old boy would be brutally murdered, and police had an idea of who may have done it, but it would take 28 years to finally make an arrest. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Kenny Conrick. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, if you have tripped, fallen, and stumbled into this YouTube channel accidentally, hello, I'm Mike. I tell true crime stories. I tell 3 of them a week, so please subscribe, give this video a like, and I also tell short-form true crime stories over on TikTok. All of the links to that are in the link tree in the description of this video below, as well as my Instagram and Facebook and whatnot. But into today's case. Kenneth Dwayne Conrick was born on July 25th, 1971, and he lived his entire and unfortunately very short life in Indiana. I don't really have a ton of background information on him, and again, it's because he was only allowed to live for 8 years, but a couple of years prior to this case happening, his parents had divorced, and he was one of, I believe, 2 children. But sadly, a year before his story happened, Kenny's younger brother, Kevin, had drowned in a lake and he passed away. Kevin was only a year younger than Kenny. Obviously, this completely just broke not only Kenny, but obviously his mom and his dad. And I guess for a time, Kenny went to live with his dad after this horrible incident took place. And, Kenny's dad had remarried. He ended up having another child with his new wife. And everything, it was all going good, as well as you can be after, the death of your child. But, life kind of moved on. And then Kenny eventually would move back in with his mom, who was then granted full custody of Kenny. At the time of this story, Kenny is a 3rd grade student at Melton Elementary School, which was in Gary, Indiana. It was October 15th, 1979. The school year had just started not too soon before. It was the end of the school day, and Kenny and all of his fellow students were released back out into the world. Now, at this time of day, Kenny's mom would be at work, and so there was a babysitter, had already been prearranged. The babysitter only lived, I guess, like a block or so away from the school, and every day they would do like the buddy system, and he would walk with one of his friends. Was the daily routine for the most part, and that was the plan for this particular day. Kenny's friend would later tell people that before they kind of broke off from one another, they had, I guess, stopped at another kid's house, this teenager who lived in the neighborhood, and he was making popcorn, I guess, and he offered some popcorn to the 2 boys, and they had some, they ate some, and then both boys would leave. Then they got to the friend's house, and that's when Kenny went his separate way. And this was around 3 p.m. or so. The babysitter would always meet Kenny at a certain location just before his house, just, to get him. And the babysitter said he was there at the normal time he was supposed to be, but Kenny never showed up. He waited and he waited and he waited, but still nothing. Kenny was a complete no-show, which was very alarming because he's only an 8-year-old kid. Kenny's friend's house was only a few houses away from the babysitter's. And the friend can confirm that Kenny was there at the friend's house when they broke off their separate ways. And so something happened to him between that house and the babysitter's, or the destination where the babysitter would meet Kenny, at least. It wasn't really that large of a distance. Not something you can see and tell everything, but it shouldn't have been that long. But the babysitter just assumed, well, maybe they changed plans. Maybe Kenny stayed home that day. Maybe Kenny's mom picked him up. This is before cell phones. This is before emails and all that stuff. So he had no idea. So he just went back to his house and continued on with his day. At approximately 5 p.m., Kenny's mom, Myrna, she gets home, and Kenny didn't get home. And she had a boyfriend who actually lived at the house with them. She asked him, "Where's Kenny?" And he said, "Oh, Kenny didn't come home. I just thought he was maybe with a friend or something. I don't know." And so the mom's like, "What?" So she's calling around. She calls the babysitter's house. The babysitter says, "Yeah, Kenny didn't show up. Like, he didn't. I just assumed he stayed home today," or whatever the case may be. But she's like, "No, he went to school." And so she called, Kenny's friend, and Kenny's friend told her the story of how they walked home. So Kenny's missing. Kenny disappeared. He vanished somewhere in that relatively small amount of space between the friend's house and the babysitter's house. Where the hell is Kenny? Myrna even goes to the school. Maybe Kenny went back to the school. Maybe Kenny's at an after-school program that he would frequently attend. But all of that was, it was nothing. Nothing turned up. And so the police, they started their search almost immediately. Myrna said that Kenny has never run away before. He's a good kid. He never has shown any signs of trouble. So this is very unusual, very concerning. And obviously the police agreed because he's an 8-year-old kid who just vanished. So they're searching everywhere for him, and the search goes on for quite some time. As police and volunteers and family is searching, police are also interviewing potential could-be suspects. They interview the friend. I mean, he's also only 8 years old, but you never know. Kids have done crazy things. They interview him, they get his story. They vouch for the friend's family, the parents, and the friend got home when he was supposed to get home, so there would have been no time for the friend to have done anything. People saw Kenny and the friend walking to the house, so it would have been impossible for this 8-year-old kid to have done something to him. They next interview the babysitter. The babysitter is this 18 or 19-year-old kid, and according to Myrna, the two of them, Kenny and the babysitter had a really good friendship. Kenny looked up to him. The babysitter was considered a really good, upstanding young individual. A lot of people would vouch for him, and police they took a story about how he waited and Kenny didn't show up, and that's really all they had for him. And so they were kind of he could have done something, but there were enough people to say who saw the babysitter, at his house and all that also the timing would not have made much sense for him to have been able to do something to Kenny and dispose of him or whatever the case may be. So they were on the fence about the babysitter. That's when the friend told them about how they had stopped at the house to eat some popcorn. And so they interviewed this kid who's also a 18, 19-year-old kid, friendly neighborhood young man. They interviewed the popcorn kid, and they don't discern anything from him either. Okay, he couldn't have done anything, but they had to question him. Kenny's mom obviously is just in complete disarray because she had just lost another one of her children just a year prior, and now this happens. And so obviously the community is circling around her, and they are there for her, and they are helping her, and they are helping the police searching for this 8-year-old kid. So his mom begins to just search his room, look through his room to see if she can find anything. And she finds something that she just didn't notice, before. There was this small stack of library books, and when you open the books, I don't know if they still do this at school libraries, but they had, the slips on the inside that you would write when you checked out the book. And when they saw the slip, Kenny checked out these books on the day he disappeared at school, which means the only way those books could be at the house is if Kenny went home first, and that Kenny didn't vanish necessarily between his friend's house and the babysitter's house, that for some reason Kenny had gotten back to his house. And now the police go back and they question the mom's boyfriend who lived there, because at first he said that Kenny never got home that day, that he never got in the house, that he never saw him at least. So they're like, well, how could he have dropped off these books at his house and you not have seen him come in the front door? And he's like, well, maybe he snuck in. Maybe he came in a back way and dropped the books off and then I guess left. Now, apparently, this boyfriend, I guess his name was Exter Wright, he worked in construction, and he had been dating, I guess, the mom for a while now. And according to family, he kind of had a genuine fatherly relationship with Kenny. But he was also kind of harsh, really harsh. He, at times to punish Kenny, would lock Kenny in his room with a padlock on the door. And he was known as being kind of a drunk, and not too soon before this happened, he had actually been involved in a domestic violence incident with Myrna, because I guess he had hit her, and he had signs of violence. He was a Vietnam War vet. Myrna said that, he is obviously capable of violence, but Exter completely denied, like, I had nothing to do with whatever happened to Kenny, wherever he may be. I didn't see him come in the house that day. He denied it, and he even offered to take a polygraph test, which he did, and he passed with flying colors. And the other thing about Exter was that he was genuinely upset about whatever may have happened to Kenny. According to police, according to Myrna, he really was emotional about this. He was like a distraught father who has lost a child. And it seemed and appeared to be very genuine to pretty much everyone. Nobody looked at it and said, this guy's acting. It was just very real. And he also was extremely cooperative. Anything the police wanted, anything they asked for, he gave it. No questions asked. And so they really dropped him off of their suspect list. So at this point, they really don't have any actual suspects. They also don't have Kenny. But how did those books get into the house that day without anyone noticing he got there? Well, they go to the library at the school and they question the librarian. They show the librarian the checkout slips. And the librarian says, you know what, there has been instances where the date has been wrong. Someone has written the wrong date on the slip. So they look at that and go, so is it possible that the date of October 15th on this slip was wrong? Librarian said, it's very possible that the books may have been checked out prior to that date and someone just wrote the wrong date. So now they're going farther back now. Now they don't think Kenny got home that day at all. So now they're back to he must have vanished between the friend's house and the babysitter's house, or the babysitter, checkpoint. About 13 days or so after Kenny vanished, one of his own family members who was volunteering to search decided to search near this Salvation Army building that I guess some of the kids would hang out at or behind it. There's like this wooded area, a bunch of, trees and whatnot. And as this family member is searching, it's about 10 o'clock in the morning when they notice something kind of in this tall grass next to a tree. Upon closer inspection, the thing that they noticed was a body. And it was the body of 8-year-old Kenny Conrick. Kenny's body was nude. All he was wearing was a pair of socks. The string that was meant to close up his sweater, his hoodie, that string was removed and around his neck, which was binding him to the tree itself. He had 42 cents in change in his pockets that the clothing was found by him. His backpack was there with all of his belongings, like his lunchbox and whatnot. Near his body was a sharp, kind of broken stick and also a broken, glass bottle. And both of those items had blood on them. Kenny had a few, puncture wounds on his body that police would determine that was likely that broken stick was used to stab him. But his cause of death ultimately was strangulation from the cord around his neck. They looked at this crime scene, and the fact that a broken stick was used and a broken bottle may have been used in this attack, they determined that this was an unplanned thing, that Kenny must have been accosted by someone who did not plan to do anything like this that day, but then this just happened. And then he he or she must have kidnapped Kenny, brought him to this area where he found a stick, stabbed him with it, and ended up strangling him. So it was just more of like the killer found weapons just there in the moment. So now investigators they're basically questioning everybody they can, everyone possible. And they come across a couple of witnesses who said, well, the day that Kenny disappeared, they saw Kenny walking with the paperboy, which was odd because a paperboy in that area just so happened to be Kenny's babysitter, the one he was supposed to be going to that day. And so police were like, wait, so his babysitter, he was seen with him? And the witnesses were like, no, not him. There's another paperboy that we saw with Kenny that day. And his name was David Bowen. David was, I think, a 16, maybe 17-year-old kid at the time, and which is kind of lining up because the FBI at this point got involved. They had a profiler determine like who may have done this kind of crime. They said that this was a sudden crime that was not planned, and it was likely done by someone very young, possibly a teenager. And so it was sort of beginning to make sense to them. So they go to David's house, and they sit down with David and his parents. And David, to them, is extremely nervous. He's uncomfortable. He's like constantly moving around when they're questioning him. He admits that he knows Kenny, because Kenny, he was on his paper route. And so they knew each other. They were not friends, but they were very well aware of each other, like enough. But he said that, no, I did not see Kenny that day. The police said, well, we have witnesses who saw you with him. And he's like, I don't know what to tell you. It wasn't me. I didn't see him. And then they asked him, okay, are you willing to take a polygraph test? And he, with his parents, say, fine, let's do it. He takes it. He fails miserably. He is a nervous wreck during the test. I always say, got to keep in mind, polygraph tests aren't always super accurate. They're really more of an investigative tool to kind of see if a suspect may react to the results by then admitting something else. So police tell him, listen, you failed this test. And apparently he gets up and he runs away from the police station. And so police go back to his house. They're like, what did you do that for? What? And his parents are like, all right, to the cops, like, you guys got to get out. And they lawyered up. The problem is that a polygraph test being failed is not evidence you can even allow in court. It's also not enough evidence to get a warrant or to make an arrest. It just isn't. And all they had at that time was people said they saw David with Kenny that afternoon. But that's it. They had no physical evidence. They had nothing else. No other witnesses to state they saw Kenny with this other guy in that area where Kenny was eventually found. They had nothing whatsoever. This is 1979. They didn't even have the technology for DNA purposes. They didn't even know what DNA really was in terms of investigation. So they didn't really have DNA per se even collected. So this case just goes cold, and it goes cold for a very, very long time. Police really believe that David Bowen was the one to do this. They know he was lying. They have witnesses who saw him with Kenny. They just have a gut feeling, but no evidence. So it's now 2005. We're talking 26 years later, and advancements in DNA technology have gone far and above and beyond. So what they do is they did collect all of the evidence from the crime scene back then, and they stored it properly, and they take all of that evidence, like the clothing that Kenny was wearing, everything, the stick, everything they had, and they had the scientists test it, swab it, and get any kind of anything they can from it, and they actually find DNA. On Kenny's jacket, which was found next to his body, they found a small amount of semen, male bodily fluid. They also were able to swab the string around his neck, and I guess Kenny also was bound by his wrists with a shoestring. They swabbed both of those, and they found skin cell DNA. And none of that DNA belonged to Kenny. I mean, Kenny's DNA was present on the ties, but there was another DNA profile. So they plug all that DNA into the CODIS system. Unfortunately, it's not a match for anyone that's already in the system. David Bowen and his family, they moved to Maine, I guess not too soon after the murder took place. And that's where he kind of just remained. But he did not remain an upstanding citizen. He was a lawbreaker. He would commit robberies, burglaries, and sort of like petty crimes like that. So in 2005 or 2006 or so at this point, police in Indiana, they find out where David is, and they go to Portland, Maine, where he is now residing as a man, I think, in his 40s. But the problem is police in Indiana still didn't have any evidence to link David Bowen to the murder. And they didn't have enough evidence to get a warrant to basically demand a DNA sample from David directly. So they had to get creative. They got in touch with his employer, and they basically followed David around, and they noticed a cigarette was tossed from the truck he was in. So police collect that cigarette, they test the DNA on it, and there's plenty of DNA on that cigarette, and it wasn't a match. Whoops. But that just can't be, right? That can't be. David is the guy. He has to be the guy. But then they found out that there was two men in that vehicle that was being driven when they collected the cigarette. That cigarette butt was likely the other man in the vehicle, not David's. That's when detectives, they recalled a phone call they got from an anonymous woman back when the investigation first started in 1979. This caller said that they believed that David Bowen was responsible for the murder and that David had killed Kenny behind the Salvation Army. But again, that wasn't enough back then to get any evidence. But they wanted to know who that caller was. And in 2005 or 2006 or so, they finally discovered who that caller was. And it was David's sister, Donna. They contact Donna, and she admits, yep, it was me, I made that call, and I still believe it. And so the police ask her, well, can we collect your DNA? Because we can at least, now with technology, we can do familial DNA. She said, of course. They swab her. They run her DNA to create a profile. They then compare it to the DNA profile found on Kenny's body. And it was a familial match, meaning that someone, it was not her, but someone in her family was the one who left this DNA sample on Kenny's body. The semen, obviously not hers, and the skin cells. So now in 2007, they're able to bring, finally, David in for questioning. He's like, I don't even remember who is this Kenny kid? I don't even remember who it is. Okay. Police are like, well, back then you knew who he was. You even admitted to us. You told us, yeah, you and him were you guys knew each other. He was on your paper route. You see him all the time. What are you saying you don't know him now? And then they let him go. But it looks like, from what I understand, they were then able to collect his DNA directly at that point, since they now had the evidence of it matching his sister's. So they ran that DNA, and it was a 100% confirmed match. David Bowen was Kenny Conrick's murderer. They finally arrest him. They bring him back in. They said, listen, we've got your DNA now. We know it was you. And he literally says to them, would it just be easier if I confess then? And so he did. He told them that on that October 15th, 1979 day, he was on his paper route when he saw Kenny walking away from Kenny's friend's house. For whatever reason, and he says he doesn't know why, he approached Kenny and he asked, hey, Kenny, do you want to go into the woods here behind the Salvation Army? And because Kenny knew him and because he knew Kenny felt trusting and said, okay, sure. And so they went behind the Salvation Army in that wooded area. And when David realized there was no adults in sight, no one could see or hear, he attacked them. He says that he tried to force Kenny to perform a sexual act on him, but Kenny wasn't doing a good job. Fucking Christ. That's disgusting. And so that really pissed off David. And so what he did was he reacted out of anger, and he grabbed a stick and he stabbed him. And then he took off the strings from Kenny's clothing and he tied his wrists up, and then he strangled him with the cord and then tied him to the tree. And I guess that's when he decided to finish his own sexual act, and he, left his DNA behind. He then tells the police that he went straight home. His mom was home, but he walked right past her. He went downstairs to their basement. He took off all of his clothes and he washed them. The detectives were like, well, why'd you wash your clothes? He said, they had blood on them. They had Kenny's blood. And they're like, your mom didn't even notice that? He said, no, I walked in so fast that I just was able to go without her seeing. Police knew that he wasn't telling all of the truth because Kenny had also been kind of beaten. His face had been punched a few times, and that his teeth had fallen out. So police were like, well, you're not telling us everything, but you basically told us enough. You admitted to doing this, so yeah, you're under arrest. On December 20th, 2007, 28 years after the murder, David Bowen was officially arrested, and he would plead guilty. He admitted his regrets and his remorse, and he even said he felt relief to finally be arrested for this because it had been chasing him for so long. So the 45-year-old man was sentenced to 50 years in prison, where he could ask for parole, I believe after 25 or so years, something around that. They said he's eligible for parole in 2032 when he is about 70 years old. So there is a chance that this man could be released back into the world. But if he does, he'll be a very old man. Well, pretty old man. Sorry to any older people. But hopefully he doesn't get parole and he'll just die in prison. But Kenny Conrick, who was just this sweet, innocent, friendly, outgoing, trusting 8-year-old kid, he just saw a fellow kid, basically, who he knew and believed him and trusted him, and he was lured away, and that 16-year-old monster took advantage of that 8-year-old boy's trust, of his innocence, and he just completely removed it from the world. And for what? For sexual gratification of an 8-year-old boy. But at least, I know it took a long time, but at least Kenny Conrick finally got the justice he so rightfully deserved. But that is it for this case. True crime, Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Please follow me over on TikTok. I have a Discord server. I also sell merch. All of that's linked in the link tree in the description of this video below. I gotta go soon because the timer is blinking at me. I don't want to put a new battery. So I will see you guys for the next case. And that was dumb. Sorry about that. Anywho's, what's shit's fucks and applesauce. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. Bye. Yeah.